Hello, gents. This year for Veterans Day, I thought it would be fun to share a little story of an incident that happened during a training event while my platoon was deployed to the deserts of New Mexico. Now, at the time that this incident occurred, we all agreed that we would never speak of it, that we would keep it under wraps. But then we took some pictures of what happened to help retell the story, just in case we ever decided to break that vow and share what happened. And here I am today. Let's do it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and reenact what happened using a scale model that I've set up right behind me here. So let me just set the stage. So there we were driving 3 Humvees in a convoy, and the purpose of this little training mission, we called it Route Recon. But we thought that when we were actually in Iraq, we were going to be driving bumper to bumper as fast as the Humvees could go. So this was practicing that. We were driving about 65 miles an hour near the top end of these Humvees. I was driving the front Humvee along with Ez and someone who I'm going to call Rivers to protect his identity because he's still in the Army. In the second Humvee, Mumph was driving and Smythe was in the back seat. I don't even remember who was in the third Humvee. One thing I want to point out is that here's a picture of me driving a Humvee near the same time. Pay attention to the helmet that I'm wearing. You notice how the chin strap is in place where it's supposed to be, down on my chin? Well, on this particular day, I stupidly had tucked my chin strap back behind my head. So the Kevlar helmet's sitting on top of my head, and the strap is going behind my head. That will become important here in just a second. As we're coming up this road, what we didn't know was that there was a depression in the road that we couldn't see as we approached it. And once we hit this depression, it was followed by a bump, and it would cause us to really catch air. So we're driving along, 65 miles an hour, bumper to bumper, and I hit the depression, and then I launch. I take off. And I went about 30 yards because we measured it later. While I was in midair, I remember the sensation of zero gravity. I was like, so this is what it feels to be an astronaut. It was completely caught me off guard. It was unexpected. And as soon as I landed, my helmet fell down in front of my face, and that chin strap behind my head kept it right in front of my face. Meanwhile, Mumph had been right on my bumper. He wasn't expecting the jump either. He took off and flew as well. And I had hit the brakes as soon as I landed by impulse. And Mumph's coming down right behind me, and he managed to swerve. When he swerved, his brush guard caught the back bumper of my Humvee just barely. In fact, it was only enough to break a reflector on the back of my Humvee. The third Humvee came along and did the same thing, swerved as well. No one was hurt. No damage was done except for the broken reflector on the back of my Humvee and Smythe's seat in his Humvee. For you see, while Smythe was in midair with Mumph, as soon as he landed, he broke his seat. The seats in those Humvees, if you've seen them, the covers come right off and you can store things underneath them. Well, Smythe ended up down in that seat with his knees up to his chin because he completely smashed the seat in when he landed. Here's some pictures of what it looked like. Mumph and Smythe are standing in the depression. Rivers is there right where we took to the air. And I don't know who that is in the back. It might be Walter, but he's back where we landed 30 yards away. Rivers, he's standing down there in the depression. And in the foreground, you can see the scrape marks of my brush guard where I hit. So to recreate that part you're seeing here. So you're looking back this way. Rivers is standing in that depression, and the scrape marks from where my brush guard hit, that's right there in the foreground. Now, I will say this. We had some guardian angels with us that day. We could have got hurt really bad. We also could have caused a lot of damage to our equipment, to our trucks, that we didn't end up causing. We had a lot of close calls during that 18-month deployment, not just during the training part in the New Mexico desert, but also in Iraq as well. But I'm happy to say that everyone in my platoon came back home eventually. A few were a little worse for wear, but for the most part, we did pretty dang good. A few minor and maybe moderate injuries, but apart from that, we were a very good platoon, and we came out of that deployment relatively unscathed. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, and since we agreed to never talk about this to anyone, could you have the good taste to not mention to anyone this story, in case there's still an investigation ongoing? Thanks. Here's an alternate ending. So we're driving along 65 miles an hour, bumper to bumper. I hit the depression, I hit the bump, I launch 100 yards, land right square on the nose of the Humvee. When I landed, Rivers was ejected out of the windshield because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He splattered on the ground, and then I ran over his remains. Ez was in the gun turret. He went flying as well. We never even found his body. It was gone. Mump, he came along. Now remember, I slammed on the brakes because the helmet was in front of my face, so it was like a reaction. So Mump comes. He somehow lands directly on top of my Humvee. There's a giant explosion, just fire everywhere. And then the third truck, I think it was driven by Mud Duck, I'm not positive. He jumped right over us as the explosion was happening. It was like one of those stunt shows where they're flying over and there's a big explosion underneath. And then he landed safely on the other side. Nobody in there was hurt. And he saw me limping away, like crawling away over here, and he picked me up. So Mud Duck, I think it was him. He picked me up. Me and Mud Duck were the only survivors. Everybody else died.